There is where the problems really began, was their complete lack of protection or supervision. This was the time when there was a lot of abuse going on behind the scenes because there was really no checks and balances when it came to who was doing what, where, and when. Hi, I'm Sarah Dion, and welcome to the Attuned Clinician, where we talk about everything complex trauma and dissociation and the challenges of being a clinician through the attuned lens. Oh, sorry. So I live in a house that's about 125, 130 years old, and it's like 100 degrees outside. So you might see me dabbing my face because houses this old, it's really hard to install central air. This channel is about focusing on the clinician experience and working with each clinician on their experiences with people living with complex trauma, what it's like working with them, the challenges that we as clinicians face within ourselves, the support that we need. So in this video, I decided to focus on my story in brief because it's not about telling all of the unneeded details. I do want to tell my story and how that impacts my um, expertise as a supervisor and consultant, how that benefits my work, and how that benefits the people that work with me. Where I'd like to begin is just a little context. I was born in the late 70s um, to a father who was radical Christian, and my mother, who was not really, but didn't really have a lot to add to that, wasn't really religious herself. I know from stories that my mom had told me was that my father, at some point, he had been drinking a lot, and at some point he had a dramatic shift and just completely stopped drinking. And at that time, I think that his very radicalized Christian faith and separatism began to escalate. I was born to him and my mother in a rural part of Massachusetts where I had my siblings and I, who were not sent to school. We were homeschooled because my father, who based this decision on his radicalized faith, did not want his children participating in what he believed was the sinful culture around us, popular culture. And so we were homeschooled, and we lived predominantly off the earth. We had an enormous garden. My father used to, I didn't witness this myself. I think it was either when I was an infant, before I was born, he literally used to cut the lawn with a sigh. He was an intense dude. He and my mother had all kinds of animals, chickens, and we lived a lot off of them and the land. And we didn't have things like we didn't have a clothes dryer. We had the washer, but my parents hung out everything on lines. We cooked on a fire cooking stove. He was an artist. My mother was a professor of art, and they my father believed that kids should just be free, and really didn't think that supervision was a thing. My siblings and I weren't allowed to partake in popular culture in the 70s and 80s. For me, it was mostly the 80s. I wasn't exposed to anything in the 80s at all. I wasn't exposed to any popular um, parts of the culture at all. So in the 80s, I really grew up with my siblings completely separate from that. The only exposure I had was through other kids on the street that we lived on, and also both of my brothers were in a boys' youth group, and so they were exposed to popular culture there, but not me. I was the most isolated one of us, and I was also the youngest. I really had no clue about anything beyond my, um, our little kind of farm. It wasn't much of a farm, but a little farm and house, and that's it. Also, because my father was a separatist, he he viewed women as less than, and he based that on his radical ideas about the Bible. He really didn't think that women had anything very good to add, especially intellectually or anything like that. So that's kind of some context. That's the foundation of my trauma. The other important piece is that both of my parents had levels of trauma from their childhoods, and both of them really didn't have much access to their emotions or um, their internal world. Really, I was isolated, and I had them as parents, a separatist and someone who believed women were less than, and that we were all bound to sin, um, and we always needed to ask for forgiveness, and that we were always guilty of something, and a mother who was very emotionally disconnected and very invested in her career and her artwork, and really not invested in being a mother. Yet at the same time, they did not really supervise us at all. And there were kids on the street that were from abusive homes. There were kids, predominantly boys. I think I was probably the only girl that was around most of the time. And there was a particular family that lived up the street that was a particularly violent family. And because of the lack of supervision, they were even, regardless, this is kind of like a duality here that doesn't make a lot of sense, that my father liked those kids. They were very heavily exposed to the popular culture, engaged in it, and yet had no problem with them hanging out at our house, but didn't really um, have concerns about what type of people they might be. There is where the problems really began, was their complete lack of protection or supervision as the only girl. And at that time as well, because the part about like culturally, like all of this is so important to my story. Um, at that time, there were youth groups that were overnight youth groups. This was the time when there was a lot of abuse going on behind the scenes, because there was really no checks and balances when it came to who was doing what, where, and when. Pretty much leaders and groups had complete control and autonomy. Um, and so if they chose to abuse kids under their supervision, it just went under the carpet. That was really happening a lot during this period of time. And unfortunately, as the only girl around a lot of boys, I became subject to an enormous amount of abuse. And the abuse eventually escalated to sex trafficking. When I was very young, since I was the only girl that I remember. Obviously, I'm sure there were other girls, but none that I saw. Because my parents were not vigilant, it was pretty easy to get a hold of me. There was no monitoring, no even consideration that that could ever happen. That that type of thing could ever happen, especially not in a little town, that this unknown little place. No one ever would have considered that sex trafficking would be happening there. But that is because there's a real misunderstanding about sex trafficking and what that can actually look like, what that means. So I think it started as early as infancy all the way until I was 8. Additional to that, I was culturally deprived. I had no access to the outside world. I had no friends because there was no one really to be friends with. There was just these boys that were friends with my siblings, but not with me. There were no girls around in my neighborhood at all, so I had no friends. My parents were extraordinarily emotionally neglectful. And I had also been bullied by, there were these two girls that came by that were older that did spend time with a neighbor at a neighbor's house, and that were bullies. And I never had anybody to tell about any of this. And a lot of it also was locked away in an amnesic state until, honestly, most of it was locked away until my 40s because of the enormity of it. I don't believe I could have managed to process the amount that I went through for the first 8 years of my life at any other time. And so it actually was good. A lot of that went into amnesic states where I had no recollection, and it was like instant. It wasn't that, when this happens for young kids and this severe abuse, it just is forgotten. It's hard to imagine, but it's forgotten instantly. Like it's over and then it's gone out of the mind, out of the world to that child. It's not out of their body. They can still experience the fear and sadness and anxiety within the body, but the brain has no recollection, which is extraordinarily confusing for kids and caregivers, if those caregivers are attentive, which mine were not. I did ask for help with my emotions because I was not a happy kid. I was lonely and isolated. I was sad. When I did reach out for help from my mother, I was turned away, saying that it would pass. It was no big deal. And I asked several times and was continued to be turned away, and so I stopped asking. Then again, I was homeschooled until I was 10 years old. I didn't go to school until the 5th grade. And I was also a year behind. My parents' awareness or insight was so lacking that it's just profound. They never talked to me about what it would be like to go to school. They never, they never prepared me. My mom dropped me off at the front door, said, "Are you okay?" and left. So I had no understanding of culture, no understanding of people. Like I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know anything. I didn't know about music or fashion. I wore all handmade clothes. That was a next level of trauma, was being a complete outsider. I was left to manage that completely on my own as a 10-year-old girl. That's where I'll stop for today with my story. It goes on. The vastness as a child goes further because of my father's narcissistic abuse and religious abuse or religious trauma. The words of the Bible being used against me to harm me and to belittle me. Unfortunately, as the youngest and the only girl, the magnitude of abuse fell predominantly on me. So shifting away from that story, yeah, I know it's a long, difficult, brutal story. Absolutely, it can still affect me today. And I'll talk about that in another video. I'm human, and that type of early onset trauma is with you. It stays with you. It's not something that just goes away. Yet I don't look back on it in a, needing to cry over it. I'm not going to say I'll never cry over it, but like sometimes I'll feel that emotion rise. But there's no shame. I don't feel anything was my fault, or I don't believe my father's words at all. Like I'm not attached to the actual story. I think what makes it hard is that regardless of not being attached to the story, there still are those after effects. What I want to return to is that going through all of that and moving with it, of rolling into recovery, of experiencing different phases and stages of recovery, of healing, of living as a survivor when you don't even know you're a survivor. It provides me such a beautiful insight into these incredible surviving clients we work with. And when I get emotional, it's when I think about them and how much they've been through, these beautiful people, and how much I want to help. When I work with clinicians, some clinicians have gone through the things I've been through. And how do we be great clinicians to people like us? And that takes a lot of healing and a lot of practice. And I want to help those clinicians know how to manage our own internal world while in a session, while experiencing our own trauma responses, how to navigate that, how to set boundaries. I know these things because I've done it. And I've done it when I didn't know I was a survivor, but I had all of the symptoms, the all of the hints and clues. And when I did know as a survivor, because the level of trauma that I remembered before my 40s was, yes, I was a survivor of it, but it was minimal compared to what I'd actually been through. So I knew what it was like to be a therapist and to navigate this as a survivor. So I have both of those stories. I've been a psychotherapist for 19 years, and within those 19 years, I've been navigating both of those stories. My past is a story. It doesn't dictate me. I get sad with grief. Grief is a huge part of being a survivor, and I know that. I have to roll with it, experience it, be with it. And grief is a massive part of psychotherapy and the work of all clinicians, because grief is part of all of our lives, regardless of trauma. These really wonderful, horrible, brutal awarenesses and insights, because my experiences were only brutal, were only horrific. What is beautiful is that what I can offer to people today. That's beautiful. And I am grateful that I can offer it. I will never be grateful for what made me be able to offer it, but I can be grateful for what it gives to me in that I can share with the world, with survivors. But for me, clinicians, supervisors, and practice owners and teams, that I have assets now to share and to give, and that I want to. I want to give. I want to help improve the lives of as many people as I can. And I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions from me, I'd be happy to answer them, or make another video or more videos to support you along your way. I thank you so much for being here. And if you followed me all the way to the end, I'm so grateful. And it would be so helpful, of course, if you subscribe, and it would help the channel immensely and help me help more people, more survivors, and support more clinicians and teams. Thank you so much. All good things.